This is not good. All right, let's find out who's here. Chang? Chang must have dropped. Okay. Beltrando? Okay. Stephen Ike? Okay. Michael Frisbee?
Yeah.
From St. Paul. Chris Gall?
Yeah.
Oh. Sarah Gensler? Oh, hello.
Hi.
All right. Were you able to get the stuff you need?
Yep.
Okie doke. All right. And there's Alyssa.
Hey.
Right on time. McKinley McKay?
Yep.
Nope. Ben Nemechek?
Yeah.
All right. Lee Pinkerton? No. And Andrew Schimberg? Okay, very good. All right, guys. So we're all set to go. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to do, first I'm going to talk to you a little bit about working with designers and printers, and then we'll go right into the elements and principles of design. And my hope is to prepare you for the first assignment, which is coming up very, very soon. So let's get right into this stuff. I'm gonna go through it fairly quickly, but it's not. This is not, brain surgery or anything. This is a very typical photo of the kind of people who work in this business. All right. What kind of people go into design? Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I think many of them are maniacs. These are people who are absolutely obsessed with details. All right. They are perfectionists, and they have no qualms about wasting things. When we get to InDesign, you will discover a program that's capable of moving objects on a page 1/10,000th of an inch. Do you really need to be able to move things 1/10,000th of an inch unless you are a maniac? Really, think about that. What kind of person could possibly care? But that's the kind of folks that we've got here. Has anybody here worked for a perfectionist? Or maybe you have a perfectionist in your family? Okay, you don't have to raise your hands if that's the case. These people will drive you insane. Nothing is ever good enough for them. It's a psychological condition. But there are many of them who are drawn to the design field. And that's where they wind up. Waste is very, very common in this field. If we get a chance to visit a printing plant or to talk to some people who are in the printing biz, you'll learn that the quantity of materials that are wasted in producing stuff is just enormous. It's absolutely enormous. Many, many things go to waste. It's just the nature of the business. So, knowing this about these people, you need to learn this thing. It's called diplomacy. It happens to be one of my weak points. I'm working on it. My mom told me maybe 50 years ago it was something I needed to work on. So I keep working on it. But you really need to hold your tongue. And don't criticize the design unless they pay you to do it, in which case it's okay to. Never, ever, ever tell people that you don't like their hardware or their software or the way they're doing stuff. Again, if they're paying you as a consultant, it's okay. But one good way to get fired real quick is to tell your boss you're not happy with the software the company is using, because it's his favorite software and his nephew installed it and his brother-in-law swears by it. Okay. And generally speaking, give people what they expect. But learn to keep your mouth shut. Now, what will happen to you as you go through the semester and you learn to recognize the good from the bad is that you're going to spot things and you're going to be really tempted to say something. Zip it. Don't say anything. Your roommate's going to show you his or her resume and say, what do you think? Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Okay. Yep. Does it say what you want it to say? Oh, yeah. Okay, good. That's good. Smile. That's all. Okay, but if it's for money, of course, that's completely different. All right. Measurements. This bizarre business has measurements of things that you cannot even begin to imagine. You're all in the engineering field, so you're used to measuring things primarily using metric. Of course, the civil engineers stick to cubic yards and pounds and tons, but the rest of the world has gone metric. The printing industry doesn't go there. The printing industry has its own system of measurement. Okay? It's done in points and picas, and that's why you have these scales on the rulers that I talked to you about getting hold of. Because I went through professional training as a graphic designer, I think in points and picas. If you're more comfortable using centimeters and millimeters, that's fine. If you'd rather use furlongs or light years, whatever measurement you're comfortable with, that's fine too. Unfortunately, you won't find those in either Word or the InDesign products. You'll have to pick something that they have there. But just to give you an example of how these folks give you choices and you can't even tell what they are. If you just hit the space bar, right, to get a space between words. But no, that's not good enough in InDesign. You've got an M space, an N space, non-breaking space with a fixed width, a hair space, a sixth space, a thin space, a quarter space, a third space, a punctuation space, a figure space, and a flush space. Okay? I do not expect you to know what all of these mean. That's why there's no final exam in here. Because it's going to get worse. All right? This is the system that we use here. So if you talk to a printer here, you need to know the system that they're using. It starts out, the terminology that we use, the main unit is the pica. And a pica is about 1/6 of an inch. And I say about, because believe it or not, it's not precise, but we're going to use it as 1/6 of an inch. We're going to ignore the decimal places. Which means that there are going to be 6 picas to 1 inch. It's written like this: 1 pica and nothing extra. So 1 inch is 6 picas, or 72 points, and this line over here is 1 pica thick. All right? If you have something that's 2 picas, all right, and picas are divided up into points. I should tell you that. There are points, there are 12 points in a pica. And that's what goes on the other side of the P. So if you've got 2 picas, 2P, 6, that's 2 picas plus 6 points. That's 2.5. The nice thing is that InDesign, if you type in 2.5 pi, it'll automatically give you 2 picas and 6 points. All right? When you use type, you may have noticed that when you select type, it's measured in points. So you'll have 10-point type or 12-point type. What that's telling you is that a capital letter in that size is going to be approximately 12 points high, or 10 points high, or whatever it is, approximately. All right? So 12 points would be the same as how many picas? Can you do this without a calculator? Okay, it's going to be 2. All right, you'll get it. You'll get it. It's a little odd. It's a little odd. Some other examples. Okay, 12P0 is 12 picas. 51 picas is equal to 8.5 inches. All right, 66 picas is equal to 11 inches. That happens to be extremely convenient, because what can you do with 66? If you want to fold the paper in half, 33. Right? You want to fold it in thirds, 22. Right? There are a lot of things you can do with 66. It's a wonderful number, and we're very lucky that 66 just happens to equal 11 inches. And if you see something like this, 14 picas, 9 points, that's a pretty good column width for a column of text on a page. We'll get to see some more of this stuff. All right? Now, if you grew up in any place where they were using typewriters, or perhaps you had an old-fashioned teacher who talked in terms of typewriters, they may have also talked about 10 and 12, but what they were talking about is something called pitch. Don't confuse pitch with points. They're 2 different things. On a typewriter, the way the typewriter works is that when you hit the key, it advances the same amount of space for every single character. Regardless of whether it's a big fat W or a tiny little I, it doesn't matter. It always goes the same distance. And the way they measure the distance that it travels is by using pitch. So, a 12-pitch typeface, that has 12 characters per inch across the line. It has nothing to do with the height of the characters or the width of the characters. It's just that you hit it 12 times, you've gone an inch on the page. All right? So if you hear somebody talking in terms of typewriter type, that's what they're talking about. All right. Now, just in case you were just starting to get comfortable with this, all right, you should know that there are 72.27 traditional printer points, not 72. Okay? So this is what I want you to do. Ignore it, okay? From now on, it's just 72 points to the inch. That's plenty. You don't need any more than that. All right. You have to be able to talk the talk. And that's why I gave you the glossary, and that's why we're going to work on the glossary. The terminology. Something wrong?
My elbow just started bleeding.
Oh, that's bad.
I'm going to go clean that up.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. The problem with this, and the reason why it's so complicated, is that desktop publishing actually comes out of 3 different places. It comes from the printing world, it comes from the computer world, and it comes from the photography world. And when you bring these 3 people together, they all have their own words for the same things. So it's going to be very confusing. Sometimes they use one expression for something, and sometimes they'll use a different expression. You'll have to learn how to use the language here. It's going to be very confusing for some of these things. I will try to use the same terminology throughout whenever I talk about these things. All right, some more printer talk. Printers don't refer to a line. They call, when you take ink and you spread it out, that's called a rule. They refer to it as a rule. And the rule is measured by its thickness, how thick the rule is. So this is a 6-point rule. That's a 6-point rule. All right. This is a 4.5-point dashed rule. This is what they call a hairline, a 1/4 of a point rule. All right. Theoretically, a hairline is the thinnest line that you can create in ink on a piece of paper. So think about this for a minute. You're looking at a projection of a computer screen, right? How many dots do we have on the computer screen? Does anybody know? What's the resolution of a computer screen? Do you know?
Well, varies. That was probably 800 by 600.
No, this one's a lot bigger than that. Okay, it's about 1040. 1040. Yeah, something like that. There's a lot of dots, but it's almost impossible to reproduce accurately on the screen a line that's a hair, because they wouldn't hit the pixels. This is made up of tiny little pixels, and you just wouldn't hit any pixels if you drew a line that was that fine. So there are all kinds of problems going from the screen to printing. We'll talk about that when we get there as well. All right, so on other kinds of crazy things, the difference between 1/1000th of an inch and 2/1000ths of an inch, this will drive people nuts, but for some people in graphic design, this is how they live. Well, if you take a rule and you draw it around a box, make a box, a border around text, around a graphic of some sort, that's referred to as a key line. So if it's just a line, you call it a rule. If it goes around something, it's called a key line. All right? So be careful with the terminology. There are doublets. There are all kinds of terms for using these things. In giving you the glossary, I'll try to sort out the different terms. But if you're not sure what an expression means, ask me, all right? It's like learning a foreign language. All right, endomaniacs. Okay, so here come the elements of design. We're going to look at some examples. I brought a bunch of magazines for us to look over. I do not use the Wisconsin Engineer as an example in this class, not ever. And the reason for that is that I know personally the people who put together that magazine, and I know that they tried their very, very best to make it look as good as they possibly could. And if it didn't do what they wanted it to do, or if it didn't turn out looking good, I will talk to them in person, not in front of a whole audience. So I don't use that, but I don't mind ripping these other guys. Okay? So you will never see me use, and I would prefer that you not use examples from the Wisconsin Engineer either. Okay? Because I know the people who did the page designs, and I don't want to talk about it. All right? Let's keep going. All right, so these are some of the things, and you'll find these discussed in the Gram book. These are the chapters that I really need you to read. I early chapters about the different parts that go into creating a design. When printers put this stuff on a page, when you put ink on a page, all of this stuff is referred to as art. Regardless of whether it's actually art or not, they call it art. That's how it's referred to. So, a line, as you know, because you've all taken good math classes, is anything that connects 2 points. Great. Very helpful, I'm sure. In design, it's used to help the reader organize information. It can separate items on a page. It can connect items on a page. It can draw the reader's eye through the page. So here's an example of a photograph that's got some really great lines in it. And you can see, if you look at this photograph, one of the first things that catches people's eye is this wonderful curve over here. That's a curved line. And then if you look at it more closely, you'll see more lines connecting things. And then all of these trellises form lines. So it's a picture that's full of lines. And the lines help bring the picture together. They help give it meaning. All right? This is called line art. And it's called line art because there are no grays. There are no colors except for black and white. So it's referred to as line art. And it's solid black. So you use lines to do all of these different things. Lines can create shapes. Lines can create borders. Here you see an example of a key line wrapped around a text box. Right? Some other examples of lines. Well, we've got arrows. All right, both Word and InDesign let you put something on the end of a line if you choose to. Here you can put an arrowhead on it. And here's another one. It's a dotted line. Here are lines separating something on the top and on the bottom. Here's a key line around a shape. Even a line of type can actually be considered a line. All right. Here's an example of some line art. Up until about 1880, the only way you could get an illustration into something that was published was either by taking a block of wood and carving away the parts that you didn't want to have ink. That's called a woodcut. Or you could etch a sheet of metal. And there are 2 ways of doing that. You could incise the metal physically with a little sharp metal tool, or you could actually use acid to etch away the parts that you didn't want to hold ink. But in either case, there was no way of getting continuous tone. And continuous tone is this. It's the ability to go through very different shades of gray, from very, very, very pale gray to very, very, very dark gray, to get all the different shades of gray. The only way you could do that was by putting bigger lines closer together to create a dark area, thinner lines further apart, or even dotted lines to show that something was lighter. And this is kind of an illustration from the 1880s. It's one of the very last times that they used this technique to illustrate a magazine. But you can see this entire picture is made up of lines that somebody etched. All right? Almost as soon as they figured out, it was about 1881, 1882, somebody figured out that you could take the same process that was used to create a positive photograph to expose some kind of metal and get the different parts to hold ink or not hold ink. And then if you did that and you could use dots, you could create something called a halftone. And within a very short period of time, within 6 or 7 years, this kind of art went away completely. All right, so more examples of lines. Here's a border at the top. There's a long, long, long line of text. Here's a rule that separates a caption from an image. Here's an image that's got kind of a funky key line that's in the shape of a bevel. Here's a line that separates a head from the text. Here's an example of a cover that uses a lot of different lines. So you see the blue lines going this way, the purple lines, vertical lines, a lot of lines down here as well. The reason, why do you think they did that? Let me ask you. Why do you think the designer put a shape like that on the front of the magazine with all of those different lines?
Sort of draws them all into
Yeah.
central point.
Yeah. It's all the lines are leading the viewer's eye in here, right over here, to this bright spot over here. And there's nothing there. Why would you do that? I don't know. But it works. Do you think it's a good cover? Would you be interested in reading something like that? Buildings take control. You like the head? No? Yes? I see people shaking their heads. All right, it's still the beginning of the semester. By the end of the semester, you will either hate it or love it. No neutral responses at the end of the semester. Wonderful shapes you can make in PowerPoint. How about that? Look at that. All of this nonsense was created in PowerPoint. Just an example of many, many different kinds of shapes. When we get to Photoshop and Illustrator, you're going to get blown away by the number of different shapes you can create and all the different ways in which you can make them attractive, emphasize them, do all kinds of things like that. Here are some other examples of shapes. This is a plain old white box. There's nothing in it. But what it does is it sets off this text. All right? This box has some important information, so it's got a key line, and there's a lot of extra space in here. In a couple of minutes, we'll talk about white space. But the text is set off in the middle of that shape. And the shape really catches your eye. Here's an example of a shape that might catch your eye. Okay. So now in this particular shape, they printed an image on top of a dark background. Now, I told you last time that printers don't use white ink. So how do you think they printed this? How do you think you could print a picture like that on a black background, or whatever kind of background it is? Okay, you don't know, so I'll tell you. I'll tell you how you do it. All right. First, you load up the printing press with black ink. Then, you make a printing plate and you cut a big hole in the middle because you don't want any black ink there. All right? So then you print the black. Now you've got a big hole here where the paper is showing through. And then you can print this photograph on top of that. All right? Now, one of the things that happened to me when I was in the printing biz was that we got a job for something called American Girl dolls. Do you know these American Girl dolls? Okay. And one of the projects that they had, they used to make these products that went with the dolls. You could buy all this stuff to go along with the dolls. And they still do. They make dresses and cradles and all kinds of toys and things that go with the dolls. And they decided that one of the things they wanted was a parcel wrapped in brown paper with a black and white photograph on the brown paper. And the brown paper had to look like it was wrinkled. So we looked at this job and we tried to figure out how to print it. And the first thing we did was, okay, we loaded up, we got an image of wrinkled brown paper. We made a printing plate. And we printed brown wrinkled paper on plain white paper. And it looked okay. All right. Then we tried to print a black and white photograph on top of that. Looked terrible. So what we ultimately wound up having to do was to put down 2 coats of white ink on top of the brown paper and then put down the black and white photograph. It was a monster of a job. And it taught me a really important lesson. Never, ever encourage a customer to use white ink. All right, let's keep going. How about the shapes over here? Do they get you? They get you right away, don't they? I circled them. So in case you missed it, right? Look at the size of that kid's eyes. Wow. And looking straight at the camera, right? How come they couldn't get the dog to look straight at the camera? You know the answer, right? Because it's a dog. All right. But you see how the shapes really stand out? What color is everything else on the cover except for her corduroy pants, or his corduroy pants? Everything else on the cover is blue, right? These 3 shapes, the corduroy, the dog, the kid, are all various shades of brown and gold. All right, this is how you can spot a beginner. You want to know somebody who's a beginner at the printing biz? You take a look at their stuff and you see nonsense like this. What they did here was they took the text and they put it inside of a text box. And they set it justified, because that looks more professional. What's missing from this? Everything. Look at how the letters come crashing up against the key line, right? And it's almost impossible to read this because of the way it's set up here. This is how you can tell that you've got a beginner, because they don't know how to use space. They don't know how to create shapes in that space. White space is important. White space lets things breathe. It doesn't actually have to be white. It can be any color. The idea is that it separates something from whatever else is going on. So here, the word keyline is set off by a lot of space. These 3 lines of text are set off by a lot of space. That's what white space does for you. And using white space effectively gives you a chance to leave a lot of room for people to see what's going on the page. Gives you a lot of control. All right? Size, very important as well. Make something nice and big, make something really, really small. Okay? Anything can happen. Use proportion. It's one of the things you can do when we get to the principles of design. You'll see how that works. But you'll have to decide how to make things the right size. This is a great example of size and proportion. Right? Look at it carefully. It takes you a second or two, right, to figure out what's going on here. Yeah, I used to have another one that was quite obscene, but this was the cleanest one I could find. Well, you know, you look at stuff long enough, you start seeing things, right? So how do you think they did that? Yeah, I know they built a gigantic champagne bottle and had the guy sit on it in the studio, right? No, that's Photoshop. That's pure Photoshop. All right, value. Dark areas tend to be serious. They tend to be gloomy, mysterious. Light areas we associate with happiness, fun, gaiety, warmth, closeness, right? And you can see when you use contrast between very, very light and very, very dark, all kinds of interesting things can happen to a design. All right. Here's an example of values. Notice how everything else is shadowy. This part over here is nice and bright. It really stands out. Color. When we talk about color in printing, we don't just mean the colors of the spectrum. We include white, and we include black, and we include everything in between white and black. All the many, many different shades of gray. So black is a color, white is a color, and all of these different shades of gray are also colors as well. So if you're given a job and the boss says, I only want it in black on white paper, that's okay. You actually have more than one color to work with. If you do get to work with color, you've got Isaac Newton's special gift to the world, the color wheel, the spectrum. Isaac, one of the things that he noticed when he was sitting outside after the apple conked him on the head, he saw stars and he saw them in all the different colors. No, I just made that up. That's not true. Okay. What he did was he realized that by holding up a prism, he would split natural white light into the different components. Well, you know this, right? His bright idea was that this color at this end of the spectrum is almost exactly the same as this color at the other end of the spectrum. So regardless of whether they're longer wavelengths or shorter wavelengths, you could actually wrap them around in a circle. And that gives you the color wheel. And when we get to talking about color and using color, you're going to be amazed at all the great things you can do because of that principle of the color wheel. Here's a good example of using color in a design. What color do you see? Red. Yeah, it's red and gold. The whole picture is red and gold. That's what they've done here. But it's really eye-catching, isn't it? The use of red. It's almost too much. I have to tell you that the color projected over here and the color on the monitor are two different shades of red. This one is a lot bolder. This one is a lot oranger. All right, color. I've got what's essentially a black and white background. But look what's in front of it. Does it stand out? Does it pop? Yeah, it really pops. That's what you can do with color. And you don't have to have, you know, sometimes people are tempted to use all the different colors. Sometimes I watch my granddaughters using something like Photoshop or one of the other programs, or even PowerPoint. Ooh, 256 million colors. Let's use them all. Right? You don't have to. You don't have to use all the colors that are available to you. Here's an example of texture. And this is what we did for the Pleasant Company. We took this brown wrapping paper and we printed a white photo on it. That's what I was trying to explain to you before. Do you see the texture in this picture? It's taken from the Vietnam War, and you've got the texture of the grass, the high grass. You've got the texture of the uniform, right? There's a lot of texture in there, and what it does is it gives you the illusion that this is almost three-dimensional. That soldier's practically walking right off the screen there. More texture. Yeah, it's black and white, but look at the shape. Those bricks, they almost come alive. You can almost feel the dirt, almost hear the crunch beneath your feet. All right, you ready to go on to principles? All right, guys, here we go. All right. The idea here, the idea between using the visuals, the elements by following these principles of design is to create something called a visual hierarchy. And what this does is that you put the elements on the page in such a way that some things are more important than other things. And that's a really important thing to remember. If you look at something like this, there's no hierarchy there. You can't tell what's important. It's not until it's redesigned using different typefaces, colors, bolding things, that you can really tell some things are more important than others. And this is a really important idea. Some elements have to be more important than others. Otherwise, it's a big blob. Have you ever opened up one of your textbooks and you came to a page and it was all text? Yeah, you know that feeling? Right? Okay. Deep breath, grit your teeth, and you dive in. Why? Why should that be such a challenge? Because there's nothing to guide you through the page. You just keep going and going and going. Has anybody here read anything by Faulkner? William Faulkner? Okay, great American writer, didn't believe in paragraphing. So you can start reading a Faulkner story and it'll be 3 pages before you come to the first indent. How does that feel? You like that? Great American writer, what can I say? All right, so let's start by talking about emphasis. That's the first principle. You emphasize text elements by making them different. You do something different with them. And you know a lot of this stuff already. You know how to use Word probably to change the color of type, right? You know that you can take the first letter and do something different with it, make it bigger, make it colorful, make it italic, something like that. Spot color is a little different idea. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we get to color, but it's the idea that you take a second color besides black and use it in special places. For example, when you want something to stand out. For heads, for page numbers, for captions, whatever you might want to use it for. Another option, and I would encourage you to start thinking about this, is using gray. You can make stuff really big and bold and make it stand out, and it's going to blow away the rest of the page. You'll discover this when you look at your resume. When you look at your resume, you're going to be shocked to discover that the word education is 10 times bigger and 10 times bolder and really, really stands out like it's a really important word on your resume. How important is the word education compared to the words University of Wisconsin-Madison, the 13th best college of engineering in the whole country? Which is more important? Which one really should be big and bold and stand out? Okay, so my solution to this is to start teaching you to use gray. All right, it's big, it's bold, it stands out, but it doesn't scream. All right, coloring the text with a gradient, you probably shouldn't do this. This is a cool technique. I'll show you how to do it, but only for fun stuff, not for professional writing. And then what you can do is you can put a line around the text, outlining it, and that defines it, and that also emphasizes it as well. Again, another technique that works well, but you need to be careful how you use it. Here's some bold. Okay, here's a regular bold face, and then big, big bold face with wide tracking. And tracking is how wide the letters are. Both Word and InDesign allow you to change the width of letters. Did you know that? You can make them wider. You probably shouldn't unless you really know what you're doing, or it's going to look really, really ugly. But it's another way of creating emphasis. All right? Orientation. Lines don't have to go straight across the page. Do you get the illusion? How many people here get this illusion? I got some students who are looking at this like they've never seen it before. Okay, this is from a movie called Fast and Furious. No, you knew I was making that up, right? Okay. It's from The Wizard of Oz. And when she meets the Scarecrow, he goes, some people go this way, and some people go that way. All right. And some people go both ways. All right. But lines don't have to go directly across the page. If you do something funky like this, don't make it too steep an angle or people are going to get stiff necks reading your stuff. Text boxes. Here's another example of white space. This is what we call a screened box. It has no key line around it, and instead it's got a screen. In this case, it's a gray, and when we talk about screen boxes, we talk about them in a percentage of solid color. So this one might be 10% black. That's how you would describe this. Okay? Has anybody here worked in the printing industry? Has anybody been in printing at all? No? Okay, just wondered. All right, so the idea of emphasis is that what stands out gets noticed the most. So if something has the word big all over, how can you tell what's important over here? It's almost impossible to tell. All right, let's see how much you guys know. We have a student org meeting. Okay, and it's going to be on Thursday. Where's my calendar? I don't have a calendar. Okay, we'll just make it the 10th. And it's going to be at 7 p.m. in 1610 Engineering Hall. And you learn about the organization. And you can join up. And you can have pizza. Okay? Very exciting, huh? How would you get people to that meeting? Don't say pictures of naked people. That was last week's joke. This week's joke, that's new joke this week.
Picture of pizza.
Pizza! Of course! What should be the most important part of this poster? That's the part that should stand out, right? That's the part that's going to get people there. All right, so that needs to be big. It needs to stand out. It needs to grab people's attention. All right? If any of you have an opportunity to do posters for student orgs, always remember, you know what's a good thing to do? Is to put in a finish time as well. Okay? If it's a short meeting, people like it better. And they'll get there on time because of the pizza. They know in 8 minutes you can go through 18 pizzas very quickly. All right. Emphasis. Here's an example of emphasis. We get a design that gets people's attention right away. Very, very simple, black and white. And the eye gets drawn to it. Right in there. All right? Big, bigger, really huge. Way to get emphasis. This one comes right out of the Graham textbook. And I put it up here because I don't like it very much. What do you think of this post? What's wrong with this cookbook cover? All right, let's take a look and see what's the focal point. The focal point is the thing that really catches people's eye the first. What's the focal point of this cookbook cover? What hit you first?
White space.
This white space here? There's nothing there except a big X. So if you're talking about food and somebody comes to you with food and it's got a big X on it, what do you think? Maybe I don't want to eat this. I think that's a terrible idea for food. Think about it, right? All right. There's a bowl of something that looks... Does it look tempting? Does it look delicious? All right. There's a fork. There's a spoon. there's a pattern here that's supposed to be some kind of southwesty kind of thing. All right? And then there are 3 chiles. And then it says Chili Cook-Off 24th Annual, which is very helpful. What year was that? 1833. No, just kidding. I have no idea. There's no way of knowing, right? And what exactly is this thing? Notice Chili Cook-Off is exactly the same size as Winning Recipes Cookbook. Is this a poster for the cook-off, or is this the actual cookbook? They're both exactly the same. Neither one is more important than the other. This is really what's important. This is the most important thing on this page. That this is a cookbook. And it's the Winning Recipes Cookbook. It's not just any old cookbook. That should be emphasized. And it's not. It gets lost over here. And then you've got Better Than the Best, Hottest of the Hot. All right. So, you think that's exciting? I mean, would that motivate you to spend $24.95? Probably not. All right. So here's another example of visual hierarchy. I use a lot of my own photos in this class. I take a lot of pictures. I love taking pictures. We're going to do a lot with photography. But I wanted to show you what happens when you take a relatively yucky tourist picture from Tokyo. It's nothing. It's got nothing. What the digital camera does is wonderful. It is true. Everything is in focus. Isn't that nice? So what? The digital camera didn't know what was important and what was not important. It also couldn't tell. The top of the picture is very, very bright. The bottom of the picture is very, very dark. Poor little camera sat there and said, what does Steve want? I don't know. I'm going to go for the middle. So the dark is too dark and the light is too light. It did its best to make me happy, but it wasn't very successful. So the top is blown out, the colors are drab, and this is what you can do when you know how to use Photoshop. First of all, I cropped it. I got rid of everything from over here on, and everything on here up, and everything on here over, because I wanted to focus on something that I thought was important, and that's this one guy who's got this incredibly worried look. So I blurred the background, cropped the photo, popped up the colors, and now this picture has a focal point. And as we get through the semester and you learn a little bit more about it, you'll learn that the focal point is right over here, right on the guy's mouth. That's the rule of thirds, focal point. We'll talk more about that when we get to pictures. But that's the idea of hierarchy. Something has to be more important. In this picture, nothing is important. In this picture, this poor guy with the worried look, he's what's important, and it's clear that that's what's going on. Here's another example, a poster. What did you look at first? What did you look at first? You need a clue? Did you look at the nose first? I'll bet you did. Most people do. And that was very deliberate. All right? Because it's different. How many people do you see walking around? All right, it's Wisconsin. You see a lot of people with red noses. But how many people do you see who look like that? Not too many. So what's the most important thing here? It's the clown, and he's happy. Look at the size of that smile. All right? And he's advertising the circus, and here's the important information. What do you need to know? It's going to be in Milwaukee, August 11th and August 12th. That's what you need to know. So they make it as big as they can, and that's what emphasis is all about. All right? So the focal point is what catches the person's eye first, and that's what you're trying to do. Did the little puppy get your eye? I'll bet he did. That's why I put him there. All right. Now, for those of you who love the math, here's the math. If there's nothing else that's important on a page, the visual center of the page, what's called the optical center, is actually located about 3/8 of the way from the top. That's the optical center. This is going to be the actual center. This is going to be the optical center. And the perfect proportion for an image is what's referred to as the golden rectangle. And it's a ratio of 1 to 1.161. And in your student handbook, I gave you all the math. You can sit there all night doing the equations if you like. I know you love doing those things. But you'll discover that this is a very good way of designing proportions so that they get people's eye. All right? Use that proportion. Contrast, another important idea. All right? Some things have to be more important than others. Things that are important need to be bigger and bolder and sharper and really get your eye. And things that are less important don't have to shout. They can be quiet and they'll still get your attention. So that's what we're doing here. We've got contrast. The initial C is a big script, right, in pink, and the rest of it is much smaller, much straighter letters, more what we call Roman up and down kinds of letters. And you can see the contrast between colors, between typefaces, all of that makes it more interesting. You need to be bold about this. Don't be wimps. I've had students who said, okay, I'm going to have contrast. I'll have Arial and Helvetica on the same page. Ooh. Ooh, that's contrast, right? No, don't do that. All right? Be bold. All right? The worst that can happen is you'll write me in your memo, you'll say, I wish I had made a better choice of typefaces because this doesn't work terribly well. Don't be afraid to use lots and lots of contrast to see what happens. All right? Combining a whole bunch of things will really make it pop, make people look at it. And you can always tell the beginners, you can always tell the wimpy designers because they don't do enough with contrast. Here are two pictures. This one over here is a photo of Albert Einstein, and it's all contrast. It's all about the part of Einstein that we didn't get to know. It was the hidden side, the dark side. And then there was the bright and sunny side of Albert. And this is a photograph of Georgia O'Keeffe taken by her husband, Edward Steichen, right? And look at what this amazing photographer did here. Look at this photograph carefully, and you'll notice that there's one shape, that's her hat. There's another shape, that's her coat. There's a face, and there's a hand. That's it. 4 shapes, folks. That's the whole photograph. But look at that image. Isn't that something? You can really see what that woman was like just by looking at that photograph. All right. So this is what's going to happen when you start looking at your resume. You're going to see stuff like this. All right. Is there anything wrong with this? No. It does the job, I'm sure, whatever the job is supposed to be. It says careers in visual communication, and then there's a head and a paragraph. Okay, and then another head, another paragraph, a list of stuff, another head, another paragraph, another list, another paragraph, head, another paragraph, another list. All right. How much more interesting is this? How much more inviting is this? All right. We'll do our little balancing act here. Now, balance is an important idea in terms of getting the page to look good. Well, if you're just looking at one page, that's fine. The left side of the page should look something like the right side of the page, or completely different from the right side of the page. But most of the time when we're working with graphic design, we're looking at a spread, which is 2 facing pages. And in this case, you want to see if you can get this page and this page to work together in terms of the spread. And that's where balance comes into it. So symmetry, when both sides are exactly the same, that's used in very formal design. It's considered solid, traditional. It's the kind of thing you'd expect to see on a poster or an invitation. Symmetry, that works really well there. If you go with asymmetry, when things are unbalanced, that's considered informal and contrasty, and you take chances here. People may not like the way it looks. Here's a couple of examples. I think these both came out of the Graham textbook. Here's a New Year's Eve celebration, perfectly balanced, perfectly readable, perfectly okay. And here's a poster that really gets your attention, because this side is all black with reverse text. This side has an image and white and some reverse text on it. But you can see how it's unbalanced and yet it still gets your attention. Visual weight is the illusion of physical weight. And generally speaking, if it's darker and bigger, it's going to be heavier in terms of visual weight. And that's an important principle. That's when we get back to when you look at your resume, you want certain things to really stand out on that resume. They need to have more visual weight than the stuff that's less important. This is where the principle of emphasis comes in. Using bold and color and adding all kinds of things to an image to make it look more important. That's what gives you visual weight. Here's a Georgia O'Keeffe painting. She was a painter, lived in Sun Prairie. And this is a painting of an iris. She did many paintings of flowers. But if you notice, this is pretty much symmetrical. In fact, it's almost perfectly symmetrical. And yet it conveys a certain lightness to it. It conveys interesting shapes and interesting colors. How many colors did she paint with? Basically 2. Green and purple. The purple is different shades, the green is different shades, but that's it, folks. She didn't use 256 million colors. She used a very limited color palette. All right, here's another one. How about that one? Completely unbalanced, right? The engineers are cringing. They expect this shape to go rolling down the hill, right? But it's more interesting because of that. Here's a photo I took, and I didn't realize until I get back how perfectly balanced it is. 4 figures almost in a straight line, almost at exactly the same distance. And there you go. It's a balanced photograph. It's interesting because the 4 women have interesting faces, and they're set in a interesting place, different from where we are now. Proportion is the idea that some things have to be smaller, some things have to be bigger. And they should make sense. If you really want something to pop, make it big. All right, so I told this to a student, and he said, yeah, well, I did really well last semester in my courses. What would you think about my having my, my education thing? And he's got his UW, and then he's got his Bachelor of Science, da-da-da, and then he's got That's not a bad idea. Think about it. It's a little bit over the top, I think. All right. This is from Toulouse-Lautrec. And what you'll notice is that it's way out of proportion. The dancer's head is very small. This is the top of a bass viol, and the musician's hand, they're huge. But it really does catch kind of the energy of the French cabaret. And that was what he was trying to do there. All right? Alignment. Alignment, alignment, alignment. The idea here is that if stuff lines up on a page, somehow, some way, that's going to make it easier for readers to figure out what goes with what. And believe it or not, it really works fine. It can be aligned along this side, or it can be aligned along over here, or it can be aligned along there. You can align things a lot of different ways. We'll talk about this when we get to the grid. Your word processor, both Word and InDesign, will give you a whole bunch of different alignments. InDesign is now up to, I think, 9 different alignments, only they're not all that different. Word still has mostly the four various alignments. And that's left justified, centered, right justified, and then well, this one was supposed to be justified, but it didn't work. All right, that's what happens when you trust PowerPoint to do stuff for you. All right, here's what it looks like. Now you can see it. This kind of type, where it's flush up against the left margin, is called flush left. Sometimes it's called flush left ragged right. But this is what 99% of the stuff that you write is going to be, because it looks the best. Centered is used for invitations. It's more formal. It's used for posters. It may be used for a title page, but not for regular text. Too hard to read. Flush right, which means that it's flush right against the right margin, is fine if you've got a caption for a photo that's over here, or you have some other reason for doing this. Don't just do it arbitrarily. And justified means that the computer tries to figure out how to spread the text all the way across the line. Sometimes it'll look fine, and sometimes it's just going to look stupid. So, just a couple of examples. Here's flush left, and you can see that the ragged right, you got lines going in and out and in and out, and on this side, everything is nice and straight. This is easy to read because when your eye comes around over here, you know exactly where to go, right? You know you've got to go right back over there. That's very easy. Centered, more difficult to read because when you come down to over here, you don't know if I'm going to go back to over here or over here. So it's a little bit harder for people to look at. This is the flush right, and this is what justified would look like. And justified, and when I teach you how to do it, you'll see it is doable and it can look just fine, but it takes more work. It really does take more work. So, a demonstration of how this whole thing would work. Here's my basic information, just as I showed you before with the poster for a student org meeting. All right, so this is information about this lawyer. It's just information. There's no alignment, no proximity, no white space, and obviously there's no hierarchy. So, let's try something different. Let's have a little bit of alignment. All right, that's good. We can make some of the type bold because it's more important, like the guy's name. And obviously you want to be able to find his website, so we made that bold. And here's his email address. We made that bold. But it doesn't have a hierarchy. You still can't see that. So let's take the stuff that belongs together and put it together. Here's the guy's name, his job title, and his website. Three things that, if you know nothing else about him, these are the three things you really should know. That's the most important. What does he do? Well, these are three things that he does. This is a blurb about him, or a slogan for his business. And this is where you can find him. These three things go together. This is the building and the street. This is the city and state. Phone number, toll-free number, and email. All right, so these are ways of getting in touch with him. So now we're starting to group things. This is a principle of proximity. Things that belong together go together. And finally, just moving the alignment a little bit, you can see, here's the guy, here's his title, this is his website, this is what he does. I added bullets to distinguish those three things. It's a quote. I put it in italics. That works okay here. And here's the street address, phone number, 800 number, and email right down at the bottom. So just by moving things around a little bit here and there, and by organizing the material, you create a hierarchy. What's more important? What you will learn in this course is a little bit about using a grid, the idea that you can line things up, and if you can design a grid for one page, you can design it for every page, and you can use the same grid for all the different spreads. It's not supposed to be a straitjacket. It's supposed to give you an idea of how the page can look. So here's an example of an alignment with a grid, and what you'll see is that you've got three columns over here. You've got empty space at the bottom for something, empty space at the top. This is where a head goes. This is where a subhead goes. This first column is used for something, a table of contents and something. Pictures go over here. This kind of a thing can be very, very useful, having a grid to help you with alignment. Makes it easy to find stuff. Repetition and rhythm, the idea is that you have certain things that appear again and again. So, for example, you always use the same typeface for body text. You don't switch from one typeface to the next to the next. You stick with one. Or you always use the same color to indicate page numbers or whatever it may be. All kinds of different things you can use. As we get through the magazines, which is going to happen in about a minute, you'll notice at the end of some articles there's a little symbol, a tiny little symbol. It's called an endit. And it is used to signal the reader, this is the end of the article. You have reached the end of this particular article. The reason for doing that is because many times articles run from one page to another to another. And how do you know when you finally reach the end? This gives you a little visual signal that this is the end of that particular article. Putting the page numbers on the same in the same place on every page. Helpful? Yes? Have you had textbooks where they didn't do that? I'll bet you have. There are some artists who don't appreciate the importance of doing that, but it really does make a difference. All right. Here's an example of a photograph that's got a lot of rhythm. All right. Repetition of the shape, repetition of the shape, repetition of the shape, repetition of the shape. All right. Here's another one by Toulouse-Lautrec, and you can see the rhythm, right? The figures are all off balance. They're moving in unison. They're uniformly dressed. You get a sense of rhythm and movement from looking at that. Helpful, yes? Just don't overdo it. Don't overdo it. Here's another Georgia O'Keeffe. It's two poppies, but they're not the same. They're different. And last but not least, flow and unity. The idea that you combine all of this stuff together and you get something that looks like it belongs there. And the question I use to get people to understand this is, you go to the grocery store and you want to find cleaning supplies. Where do you look? Not in the bakery. Not over at the meat counter. You go to the cleaning supply section. That's the way documents have to work. They have to work the same way. The stuff needs to be where people expect it to be. So you group the elements together. You use that principle of proximity. Stuff that belongs together stays together. That creates unity. And then repetition of elements. So, for example, in this presentation, right, I use the same typefaces throughout. This is Bookman Bold. Boxed head at the top where it says unity. Same logo in the lower left. Boxed subhead in the lower right. Every single slide in this show had the same thing. It all goes together. It's all part of unity. And finally, very, very simple way of explaining unity. I've got 4 pages from an article, and what I've done is I've taken pictures to illustrate the story. I put the pictures in the same spot on every single page. Guess what that means? As you page through this document, where are you going to find the pictures? They're always going to be in the same place. Page number is always in the same place. Makes it so much easier when you do that. So unity makes the whole thing stick together. Another Georgia O'Keeffe. You can see very similar shapes, limited palette, similar textures, and that's the story with unity. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give out some magazines. And what I'd like you to do is to go through them and see if you can identify some of the elements and principles. And we'll walk around, we'll take a look and see who's got what. You might need more than that. Take as many as you need. Oh, Northwest Airlines, yeah, there you go, man. Fetch magazine. Oh, Wired. Oh, be careful, man. There might be LSD on the pages. So what are you starting to notice? Am I turning into maniacs yet? Contrast, yep. And what do you notice over here? A key line all the way around the first page, right. Sets it off. What do you look at first? Oh, you're a boy. You look elsewhere. Never mind. I know how it works. I wasn't born yesterday, folks. What do you see? You see an interesting line? Yeah. Yeah.
Use a lot of shapes.
You betcha. Absolutely. Are you awake? Barely. Okay. I'll do my best. What'd you see? Anything? What are you noticing? Circles. Yeah. All over the place.
Does a crossword puzzle count as lines?
Yeah, well, it does, I suppose, but it's not a design. It's not designed to get you. All right, here's a great picture. It's a shape. It's a familiar shape, and yet you've probably never needed or wanted to look that closely. What do you see? Look at this page, turn the page. Look at that page, all the same. It's all the same, see? It's repetition.
Tried to do that. Just 3 pages.
Yeah.
You're looking at this.
Metal.
Turn and then you just see that right now.
Yep. Yep. Yep, absolutely. And the bottom half of the page is all white space. All white space. What do you see? Yep. Every page has that. Every single page. Right? They do it over and over and over again. Here's an example of too many lines. Yeah. Yeah, don't do this, okay? You have to take a lot of drugs to do this. What are you noticing? Tell me some of the things that you're seeing here. You notice how they don't use every single color in the whole rainbow? Yeah, limited palette of colors. You got an image there, it's yellow, and it's red, and it's black, and that's it. That's pretty much it. Look at all the white space. Look at this. There's nothing. Now there's some people that will go crazy with this. They say, why don't you put more copy in there? You got room for a lot more words. But does it work? You look. You tell me.
It seems to do well.
Yeah, it seems to be okay. You don't need to fill the whole page up with ink.
Do you think that they would have, by right aligning the text, it points to the image?
It might. Here's a cool one. I'm going to put this one up in the document camera here. Let's see what everybody thinks here. So we'll go to the document camera. We'll zoom in a little bit here. This is an ad for an Acura. Okay. It's a spread. I need to zoom out a little bit. All right. So one page is all gray and they printed with white ink. No, they didn't. That's called, what do they call that? Reversed, right, reversed. Reverse the type out. But what you need to notice here is, look at this. It's flush right, ragged left. So what do you think? Why do you think they did that? Here, watch, I'll show you something. Watch my finger, okay? Do you see the reflection of the shape over here? That swirly shape, do you see that? Yeah, that's what they did. Now, it looks like they drove through some poop. I don't know.
Oh no, the tires have spikes on them. So
the tires have spikes on them? Holy cow. Do they really? Oh my goodness. Why did they do that?
Control is power.
Is that legal? And are you allowed to put spikes like that on your tires? Do you know what would happen to the roads in Wisconsin if people actually did that?
They probably look the same.
I don't know. Is he done with it? Yeah, keep moving them down. Move them down. This is my favorite, Traffic Technology International. What's our favorite color, folks? You betcha. We traffic technology people, we love orange. But you know what else you can see here? Can you see the lines? What are the lines supposed to do to you? They move your eye? through the page? Those are orange arrows? Yep, that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. So what I need you to do for this homework assignment that's coming up here, due next Tuesday, is I need you to take your sheet protector and find either a page or a spread, either one, and mark it up and tell me some of the things that you see. So for example, I could use this particular design to show there's a shape. This guy is a shape. Her dress is a shape. So there's 1, 2, 3 shapes here, and then this is text. I might show that the text, whereas the shapes are black and white, the text is in blue. And here's the alignment for that text, and there's an alignment for this text. All right, so that there are 2 different alignments for the text on the page. And this page actually has, believe it or not, it has symmetry. There's actually something very symmetric about this. Small shape, big shape. It's asymmetrical. It's sort of off balance, but there it is. So you can do that. You can show me that. All right, let's see, I got another one. I'm not going to find enough of these. All right, so here's a page. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit on this. And you can see it's got texture. This might be a good example of texture. Why would they put, what is this an ad for? Breakfast cereal. Okay, so why would they use a kind of a textured background for breakfast cereal? What kind of people eat grape nuts? Come on, folks, get your marketing caps on. Who here eats grape nuts? Oh, good. We now have a demographic that doesn't eat grape nuts. We know that our 18 to 49-year-olds don't eat grape nuts. Okay? So who eats grape nuts? Older people. You know why they eat grape nuts? Because that keeps you regular. Okay? But grape nuts are natural. And I put that in quotes. Little air quotes. Can you see my air quotes over here? All right. And to make you understand how natural they are, it's not plastic. It's got texture. It looks like paper or grain or something natural, some kind of natural material. All right? So that's how they do it. Do you see 2 big red lines? Yeah. Okay. Can you see the alignment over here? These 2 are lined up, but nothing else is. And yet, look over here. This lines up perfectly with that. The designer, even while trying to be informal, couldn't resist making sure that everything lines up perfectly. I'll take you through another one over here. Okay? Okay, you tell me what you see.
So the text right on their face.
Text is right on their face, okay, but what kind of text is it? Centered? You see that it's centered? All right. And it's balanced. Is this picture balanced? Is this page balanced? Almost too perfectly balanced, isn't it? Yeah. You could draw a line right down the middle. Well, actually, that's not, let me get my glasses on, because that's not right, is it? I'll do it in inches for you guys. Okay. This page is 7 3/4 wide. So that would mean that it is 3 7/8. Yeah, there it is right there. It is centered. The text is centered right down the middle. How about that? And yet the face, I don't know. I guess it's the same. All right, what else can you see in this picture? What else do you see? Dark and light? Contrast? What's behind the guy? Don't know. Too dark, right? Texture? Can you see that pepperoni over there? That's got Alyssa's name on it. She can practically taste it. I know. I know. The pepperoni, notice the pepperoni isn't burned? How come that every time I follow the directions on the box, some of the pepperoni gets burned? Why is that? What am I doing wrong, guys? All right. Look at the bottom over here. You see the alignment? Look at that. Aligned right? Because over here is the DiGiorno box. All right? And if you follow this picture, you will sort of get a sense. If you go right through the mozzarella over here, you're going to see that it's going to take you right down to the box. The way the dark and light is set up. Very clever stuff. All right? Is everybody here going to be able to find magazines to use for this assignment? If not, you can come to my office. I'll give you some magazines. All right. Great, folks. Be nice to your friends. Now that I've started turning you into maniacs, don't criticize their resumes or their papers or anything. Just grin. I'll see you back here on Thursday.